Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 671 of People Behind the Science. Today, we are looking forward to revisiting our interview with Dr. Susan Krumdieck, originally released on August 26th of 2015. Susan has been a pioneer in a new field called transition engineering that involves rethinking and re-engineering our world to address future issues surrounding energy and other societal needs. She's also made substantial contributions to materials engineering, developing new materials to help address problems related to energy and other areas. And in our interview, Susan shares more about her life, her research, and her work. So listeners, get ready for this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. Today, I am excited to introduce you all to Dr. Susan Krumdieck. So, Susan, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm fine.
Well, we are delighted to have you with us on our program today, and I'm excited to introduce you to our listeners, so I'm going to give them just a touch of background about you. Now, listeners, Susan is a professor in mechanical engineering and director of the Advanced Energy and Materials Systems Lab at the University of Canterbury. She is also a research leader with the Geothermal Energy Conversion Research Group, founder of the Global Association for Transition Engineering, and director of the From the Ground Up Research Consortium. Susan received her bachelor's degree and master's degree in mechanical engineering and energy systems engineering from Arizona State University, and she received her Ph.D. in mechanical engineering from the University of Colorado, Boulder. Now, Susan is the recipient of the Gold and Silver Sustainability Awards from the University of Canterbury. She's a member of the Royal Society of New Zealand and also a former member of the Royal Society of New Zealand's President's Energy Panel. And listeners, Susan is here with us today to tell us about her experiences in life and science. So Susan, today we want to get to know you both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you start off by telling us what you like to do with your time when you're not busy with engineering and science?
Well, I'm definitely probably the world's least efficient gardener because I spend a lot of time in my garden watching vegetables grow. But I really like to be in my garden. I get really happy as soon as my seat gets onto the cycle and I start pedaling. So I'm definitely not a member of the Spandeck Legions. I just like to get on my cycle and go.
I like it.
And music. I'm a member of a choir here in Christchurch, New Zealand that sings the most ancient music that we can find. So Gregorian chants and polyphony and things like that from 600, 700 years ago.
Wow. So how do you find this music?
It's historical, and the people who keep it alive and keep alive how to pronounce Latin and things like that. We're a small subgroup, but it's still out there.
Well, that is phenomenal. Susan, it sounds like you do a little bit of everything in your free time. Well, great to hear a little bit about your life outside of work. And I think wonderful to get a window into the multifaceted person that you are, not just the person that everyone sees at work. But we are going to talk about work next. So, Susan, I want you to tell us how you describe what you do to someone who's not familiar with your field.
I've found over the years that there are very few people who actually know what engineering is and what engineers do. We are the magician behind the curtain, I think. Our job is to make stuff work. And if it's working well, then you don't know we've been there. So we're like the little elves of society running around making everything.
Backstage, making it beautiful. I like it.
Exactly. And we love it. You think of your nerdy engineers just getting so excited over what they're doing. And it's true. Most engineers really do like what they do. And it involves science because you can't make stuff work if you don't understand the science. But it's a lot more of a creative art, actually. It's got lots of fun things like that. We always know we're going to fail. So you work that into your plan.
I like it. That's a really great approach.
The first time you try something, you got to know that something about it isn't going to work. So you're continuously observing, learning, improving, observing, learning, improving. And that's how you get stuff to work.
Right. You've got the iterative process down.
If you look around you, everything has been engineered. Everything in your world has been engineered. And what I work on now is re-engineering it because it's all been engineered from a perspective of the way the world has been, for the last 70 or 80 years. And we're going to a new place now where everything is different. So rethinking what we mean by making things work is what I'm working on.
Well, that is a great description of what you do in your day, Susan, and wonderful to hear a little bit more about the basics of engineering, because I think you're right. A lot of people don't really understand what it entails and what a day in the life of an engineer might look like. So I'm excited to chat more about your work as we go through the interview. But I want to pause here and talk about motivation. You mentioned that you were always really excited to go into work every day and do what you do. But do you have a favorite motivational quote or maybe a saying that you keep in your mind through your day to keep yourself going through these failures and challenges?
Well, here's mine. The only thing that we know works for sure is to stop doing what doesn't work.
That's good. So tell me how you incorporate this in your day.
The way that I'm working now and my students, it's actually quite challenging because we need to focus on what needs to be changed, not trying to find new things to bolt onto a system that's failing, but look inside the system and see what it is that is at risk, what are the failure modes, and then work on how to change that whole system so that it will keep working. And there I'm talking about energy systems that rely on resources that are constrained, that kind of work. And in the engineering area, we do that a lot. You get recalls on cars every now and then, don't you?
Right.
Like I said, not everything we do works right the first time or the 10th time. And so it's sort of called change management, where you try to figure out what is it that's really causing the problem and get it fixed. And so if you look now at our energy systems, on one hand, it all works great. You plug in your computer and electricity comes out of the wall and it all works. But on the other hand, if we look forward 50 years or so, we're actually going in a pretty bad direction. So something needs to change. And so focusing on what needs to change is quite a challenging thing to do.
Well, I imagine so. I know I'm one of these Band-Aid approach people myself. If something breaks in the house, you just sort of stick it back on and hope for the best.
Right.
I appreciate people like you who can get back to the root problem and go back and make those changes that need to happen. So that is awesome. But now, can you tell us a little bit about some of the people who may have motivated or inspired you over the course of your career? Do you have any particular role models that come to mind?
One does come to mind. I was at University of Colorado at Boulder as an undergraduate as well before I went to Arizona State. And Professor Albert Bartlett was there, and he's a physics professor. And he gave a talk, probably once a year he gave the same talk, and it's on YouTube if you want to look for it.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have to find it.
And it's the simplest idea ever. And it's the simplest little bit of mathematics. And yet he's right. This will be the downfall of humanity.
Oh, no. And this was what inspired you.
It's the inability to understand exponential growth, that it's futile, what exponential growth really is, that we can't understand what we've committed to. And therefore, we can't see what we're doing. And we're really on a path to failure if we don't do something. And so in the 80s, when I first heard that, I thought, well, that's really simple, but you're right. I don't see it.
It's hard to wrap your head around. Yeah.
It's simple. Well, if we keep growing our electricity demand at a certain rate, you can project forward to a time when you will need, again, as many power plants as you have now. You will have doubled. And in the 20s, that doubling meant a bit more. And then in the 30s, and every time these things double, it means bigger, and that seems better. But now we're at a point where those exponential growth curves are starting to blow up at us. And that's where you say, okay, well, I understand that exponential growth definitely can't go on forever. And yet, is that how we talk about growth?
Right.
So that sort of cognitive dissonance where you're holding two conflicting thoughts in your mind at the same time that, well, that's what we've been doing. So won't we keep doing it? And yeah, but we can't keep doing it. Al put that thought there a long time ago, and I've been trying to work on that, as you can tell from my quote.
Right. The seed had been planted many years ago. I like it.
That's right.
So can you take us back then even farther and tell us what were some of these earliest memories of you becoming interested in these questions in engineering and perhaps in science in general?
Probably the first interest in science was because my father was a high school science teacher.
Gotcha.
We were in a very rural area in Colorado, down in southwestern Colorado. And if you know about that area, there's Mesa Verde National Park down there. And I grew up a few miles from Mesa Verde National Park. And so completely steeped in being surrounded by this archaeology. And I tell you what, that's what I wanted to do with myself, was be an archaeologist, because it's just so fascinating that there were people here so long ago living their lives, doing their own thing. They had no idea about us. And yet here we are. What were they thinking? And why aren't they there anymore? Where did they go? Because, of course, around the Anasazi, the ruins are all throughout that area of southwestern, the Four Corners area. There's this big mystery around that there was this civilization that had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they walked away, basically, within a very short amount of time. They walked away. They left. I don't know.
They disappeared, yeah.
But what happened, right? How did things like that happen? And then the energy crisis hit back in the 70s.
Aha. All right. I was wondering.
And if you live in a very remote, rural place, you find out that people work together to adjust to things like that when there's these emergencies and changes, and how they work together. And from that remote rural area, it looked like people just adjusted to scarcity. Whereas in the news, it looked like people went crazy from scarcity. Mm-hmm. I was always kind of confused about like, what do we have here in our little backwater, poor part of the world that allows us to adjust and maybe make more use of resourcefulness when we don't have just a lot of resources? Whereas the people in the cities and stuff were panicking and lining up and getting all excited and crashing the economy. And why can't you guys just adjust? What's the problem? So then I got really interested in kind of those two things going together, energy systems, and then how people actually are part of that system. And that's what my master's degree was about. So I didn't actually know what engineering was as a kid from the rural backwaters of Colorado, but turns out I was really good at math. And of course, when my high school science teacher said, well, you should do engineering. So I said, well, do they do energy? And he said, yes. I said, okay, then that's what I'll do.
Sign me up. Yeah.
That's right.
So then you were starting in college, going into engineering. What are some of these key moments that really propelled you to where you are today? Now you're all the way over in University of Canterbury.
It was the 80s, and so we were still quite interested in energy. There was a lot of stuff. I worked on solar energy and wind energy, and I got my master's in energy systems, so I also learned about buildings and how to manage the energy in buildings and how to design buildings for solar and efficiency and all that good stuff. And then by the time I got to my Ph.D., we sort of weren't thinking about energy anymore, and there wasn't much funding in energy. It had kind of moved over into things like biofuels. So I did my first PhD project on combustion of a type of biofuel. That didn't work out. Okay, now here's where it gets weird. A successful research project, right? I got this stuff to burn. I did the combustion science. I built a combustor that would do it. I measured the emissions, yada, yada. And yet, this will never be a fuel source for anybody. I know that.
Really?
Yes.
Why?
Because it's not reasonable. It's not practical. So then I went on to material science and got my PhD in materials and came up with a cool way to make some kinds of high temperature materials. And then I started a business to make those materials and was working on fuel cells. Mm-hmm. So had a big surge in the 90s and early 2000s in hydrogen. Remember that?
Yeah.
So again, really good research, made the materials that were necessary in a way that was a breakthrough, one of these breakthroughs. And at the same time, learned all about hydrogen and fuel cells and that we aren't ever going to be doing this.
So was it frustrating doing this research and then getting to the point where you realize it's not going to be applied?
I spent 2 years on this because of a story you guys told me when you gave me the funding for this. And I'm a smart person. How come I didn't see through that story? Right. Which then takes me back to humanity, that we really do love stories that sound good and we're easy to con.
And I think change is hard when it comes down to it, right?
It is because, well, something like hydrogen, we're talking about, if that was actually possible, which it isn't, we're talking about a scale of change that is so far beyond our imagining that it's silly to even talk about it. And yet everybody was buying into it hook, line, and sinker because it sounded like it wasn't change. It was just more of us being brilliant and we could have hydrogen. And yeah, that kind of, wow, we are funny creatures.
So, Susan, you mentioned something that caught my interest. You said you were starting a business at this point. Can you tell us a little bit about that process? Because I think a lot of academics struggle with the application of what they do to a business setting and the thought of being entrepreneurial and how to move their research in that direction.
Well, the process that I came up with during my Ph.D. is really a ground changer. And so it's what I've been doing since I went back into academia, basically to work my way to professorship, because there's a lot of good science in there that I've written lots of papers about how it actually works. Like, okay, I could see how it would work, but now it's on paper how it would work, right?
Sure. Now everybody else can see it. Yeah.
Exactly. Now it's all explained. It makes sense now to everybody besides me.
Sure.
The inventor's dilemma. Look, I don't know. I can just tell you it'll work.
Right. I have this thing. Yeah.
Believe me. Well, now you can believe me. It all works. So it really has a lot of capability to do interesting things. So I thought, well, that's one route, is to start a business where we develop this. What it is it's a way to put a ceramic coating, and a ceramic's like your teacup or something, on a metal part. So if you think about, you can make things out of metal. That's what metal's really good at. You can make the part you want, but then you've got a metal surface. And if it's a high temperature application or corrosive, then a ceramic would actually be better. So getting a ceramic coating on a metal part would be a really useful thing to do.
Gotcha.
So that's what the process was. And now I've started a company again, and we're now doing it again now that I've spent a dozen years on the science or so. We're back at the company stage again. And I will say that it's a very exciting thing to do, to start a company and to learn all about meeting markets and raising the funds, and just how risky it is actually to start a business. Anybody who's actually gotten one through the stage of getting it up to where you've got a kind of a steady state thing, people want your thing, it all works out good.
Right.
That is a big challenge, that's for sure.
So did you have any mentors along the way, or where did you pick up this know-how? Was it sort of on the spot as you went?
Oh, no, it's a great program in the United States by the National Science Foundation. If during your PhD, you actually do come up with something that has technical potential and commercial potential, if those two things go together, then they have what's called SBIR program, which is Small Business Innovation Research. And you can put forward your science and your research plan, how you would take that into a business. And they have really top people from around the country evaluate all these applications and pick some of them for the government to fund, so you can take a punt at it. And during that process, you also get workshops that teach you about entrepreneurship and teach you about business and that beginning phase of business and how to build relationships and how to manage a business and the legalities. So it's a great program in the United States that they have there.
Well, listeners, if you are in the stage where you have a great research idea and are trying to maybe implement it into a business, this sounds like a fantastic opportunity. So I'm glad you mentioned it, Susan.
The downfall of my business, I will say, is that I chose solid oxide fuel cells as my product. And again, here we go. Successful research. I made the material that was the key to unlocking the solid oxide fuel cells. And then, do you have any solid oxide fuel cells?
I think the answer is no.
No. So I chose the wrong product. I chose a product that at the time was in the upward swing of the hype cycle. And so it looked like it was going to be the next big thing, but it wasn't. It was just a hype cycle. So I solved a problem that really didn't need solving. So I said, all right, fine. I'm going to go do research for a while, and then we'll try another product later.
Well, you can put that solid oxide fuel cell in your trophy case. That's perfect. Well, Susan, we've talked a little bit about the work you've done over the years, but I want to know now about one of these projects that you are working on now that you look forward to the most going into to work on.
All right. Well, I've got 2 lines of work. Well, okay, maybe more than that. But the materials science, because I came up with this process, that is a clear-cut piece of work. Engineering material science, I know what journals I would publish in. I know the next step that I want to do. I know how to get a student a PhD in it. And it's very clear-cut, business as usual. Then I've got the other half of what I do, which is this essentially engineering for the future. And how in the world would we do that? If you think about the fields of engineering that you might know about, say aerospace, did aerospace exist in the turn of the century, 1800s? No.
Right. Yeah. Right.
How about computer engineering? How about chemical engineering? The fields of engineering evolve with the needs that humanity has and the opportunities that arise. So right now we're at a point in our progress where what we do is profoundly affecting people that we don't have a conversation with. And that's ourselves in the future, our kids in the future, our families in the future. those people exist, and we must know they do. And yet we don't engineer for their needs. We engineer for ours. So if engineering is going to be part of human evolution and human progress to better ways of doing things, then we've got to start engineering for the future as well as for now. And that's where all the change and everything that we do comes in.
Sure.
So I call that transition engineering. So that's kind of my invention on the other non-materials area, which is, okay, how do you look objectively at the successful systems we have now and say, okay, what needs to change for you, future self?
Sure. So it sounds like this is where some of the creativity comes in, trying to forward think into what the future is going to look like and build a field even that would meet that need. So is this something where you find you can be a little bit more creative?
It takes every creative brain cell I've got. I should back up just a little bit and say, during my undergraduate engineering education, I don't think that I ever had a semester where I didn't take one or two extra courses in humanities, sociology, anthropology, history, that sense of being whole, that sense of that, okay, I'm a technical person, but I'm also an instrument in this whole experiment. That was important that I have all that background, because now looking forward, if I'm going to actually try and move my work and my thinking and my requirements that I'm working to into the future, then what I think I've discovered is that humans, we haven't actually developed that ability to think into the future very much.
It is a curse, I must say.
I think it's true. I mean, think about your own retirement. You know it's going to happen, and yet it's not really that real to you until you get to be about 64 and a half, right?
Think about the deadlines I have next week. Those aren't real until Monday, right?
Exactly. And so I've been trying to figure that out. I've been reading through lots of psychology and stuff like that. And I think that we haven't had to think into the future very much. Think about, we've got 60 some thousand years that they're pretty sure have been people just like us pretty much doing what we do. But we've always had tradition is how we thought into the future, that we do everything that we do to perpetuate ourselves. We hang on to things that work really tightly. And that's one of our survival mechanisms, is that when we've got something that works, we don't change it. And so that's how tradition works. And yet we do change pretty quick. We adapt pretty quick when something new comes along from, say, one of my people, one of the tinkerers, one of the inventors. There's a huge gap where the inventor has to demonstrate how that would work and why it would be cool. But then, boy, we'll take that up pretty quick if it does work.
Right.
So we've been doing that side of it flat out for a good while now. But our inability to look forward to see where that's taking us has put us in a bit of jeopardy. And so now actually putting together a methodology by which we can develop that future sight and really understand it. We now have the modeling and computers and all that stuff to actually do that now in this point in our history. So I think it's kind of an exciting field.
Definitely, and an exciting time to be in it. I like it. Now, Susan, in talking about some of your work, you mentioned some of these frustrations and that you sort of developed the wrong technology or created the wrong thing at the wrong time. And I think in every field, there are problems, there are frustrations, there are challenges. And we love talking about these on our program because I think it's important to point them out to the public so people kind of have an idea of what a day in the life is like. And so people who might be interested in those careers kind of know what they're getting themselves into. So can you share with us another one of these stories of challenge or failure or struggle and how you got through it?
More failure? Gosh, I thought we were going to get on to the successes.
That's next. You have to pay your dues here. More failure.
Oh, gosh. Okay. How about another failure in the material science area?
Sure.
And again, it's one of these things that I know that there's a need for a certain material in a certain product, a biomaterial. So you get a hip replacement. And there's a ceramic material that essentially is a bioceramic. It's the same ceramic that you make in your body, hydroxyapatite. It's the hard part of your bone.
Sure.
And so if you can coat the metal implant with that material, then the body will sort of heal to it. It'll recognize it as kind of a broken bone and heal up to it, as opposed to if it's just bare metal, it'll heal away from it because it's a disturbance in there. So this material is a real important material, and it's important to be able to apply it. It's a ceramic, and it's important to be able to apply it to metal. So it's perfect for my technology that I developed, which, by the way, I should give the name of that. It's pulsed pressure metal organic chemical vapor deposition.
Oh, very nice. Did you come up with the name?
in that field of materials, you name your process. That's how you describe what it is you're doing, is you name your process, and the process describes how it's done. So there's a lot of these. Atomic layer deposition, for example, is another kind of process. Atmospheric pressure chemical vapor deposition. It goes like that. We like our names in this field.
Sure.
There's mine. So I worked with some students and some colleagues, and we came up with a way to make that ceramic and to make it on the complex shaped parts that go into hips and elbows and things like that. From the engineering standpoint, we're very proud of ourselves, and you want to just hand it off and say, here you go, we solved your problem. But it's the medical field we're talking about. That's a whole nother world. You now have to do some rabbit trials. You have to put it into some rabbits and see how it works, and then pigs. And then there's this really long road ahead for something like that. And we really weren't prepared for that. We just did our materials part. And we got some collaborators at Colorado State University. But the technical difficulties, or maybe it's not even technical difficulties, the IP difficulties, the clinical trial difficulties of bringing a medical technology forward were, I'll call that a fail. I was not prepared for that.
So would you do it again, Susan? Or are you going to steer clear of the medical world?
There's other things you can do. No, we published that. And so I think what it would take is that you'd need a group where you have lots of people who actually understand all of those parts of the system. Depending on what material you're working on, you need a collaborative group where you have all of the different fields covered. Actually, the material we're working on now that we've started a small company on hopefully won't be the next fail.
Right.
It's in the medical field, but it's antimicrobial coatings for touch surfaces in hospitals and healthcare facilities, and maybe even boats and things like that, tight places where people might pass around germs. The idea there being that, well, you've heard of some of these resistant bugs and infections that just move around through hospitals. And one of the main ways they get around is just by the surfaces people touch. So if you can put a ceramic coating, that makes it very hard for the bacteria and viruses to stay alive once they get on those surfaces, then you can cut the infection rates. So because I've got a way to put a ceramic on complex shaped metal objects like doorknobs and rails and elevator buttons, then that's what we're working on now. So sort of in the medical field, but it's not going to go in anybody's body.
Right. Not quite as crazy hoops you have to jump through. Well, Susan, this sounds like really exciting technology. And I'm glad you shared the story of the challenges that you face kind of entering in this new arena of medical technology. But now I am going to turn it over to you for you to share some success stories. And I think you've sprinkled some in throughout our interview thus far. But can you share with us one of these successes that's really meant a lot to you? And it can be a big win or even just a little victory along the way.
This field of future engineering, that's what I care the most about. And I'm not quite sure why I care. Maybe because I've got a mutation that allows me to feel a little bit more something about the future than the average person. There's some people in our society that can really feel the past. They can really go there in their minds and understand what people were like. And a lot of them maybe tell us really good stories from the past. They write those historical novels for us that we all love so much, or they're archaeologists, anthropologists, that sort of thing. Well, where are those people that really understand the future and can tell us about that? And so I do think, like I said, that we might have a bit of future blindness, but maybe it's because I've just been trying and I've just practiced and I've let myself think forward into the future along different pathways and scenarios and think about things that we do right now and how that changes the entire future. And actually coming up with a way that when I teach it to engineers, they can now see how to do it too. That has been probably the most happy success that I've had, is that moment when the light bulb went on in my head and I said, oh my gosh, I see how to do this. And it was actually in a meeting. I'll tell you this light bulb moment because innovation moments are few and far between.
Yes, those aha moments. I like it.
The government of New Zealand sent me to the American Association for the Advancement of Science convention in 2007. And I was giving a workshop on the sustainability research in New Zealand. And so it was well attended. Lots of people came. That was exciting. They were hoping I had more of an accent, but no, I'm American living in New Zealand. Right. And then I think because I'd been sent there by the government of New Zealand, the organizers of the conference thought I was an important person in New Zealand.
Well, you are, of course. Right.
Not really at the time. So I got invited to a roundtable discussion. And let me tell you, who else was at the roundtable? The president of Harvard and the president of Stanford and the president of Cornell.
Oh, wow.
Yes, like that.
Yeah.
So it was a 1.5-day roundtable discussion. And the topic was, what are we going to do about sustainability? Because here's this thing, sustainability. And you can't get away from this word. Companies want it. The people want it. It sounds like a good thing. Are we going to argue we don't want it? Mm-hmm. And yet when we look at our universities and National Science Foundation, the head of the something division, there was all these National Science Foundation people there. And this roundtable group was trying to figure out, what are we supposed to be doing about this? Should we have a sustainability fund? Should we have a sustainability department in the universities? What are we going to do about this?
That is a great question. I want to hear the answer.
Isn't that a good question? I'm not sure it was answered all that satisfactorily. And after 1.5 days, I'm not going to pipe up and say anything because then they'll find out I'm not an important person in New Zealand. So after 1.5 days, we'd done lots and lots of workshopping and lots of discussion. And we had gotten to the point where all of our sticky notes and all of our sticky bubbles and all this stuff we'd done had got us to the point where we now knew that what we needed was a definition of sustainability. And I just thought my head was about to explode. Like, are you kidding me?
Right. Back to square one.
This is not useful. And that's when the light bulb went on. And anybody who hasn't invented anything yet, here's how you do it. You have to know that the solution is not possible. Because if it was, it wouldn't need inventing, would it? You'd just go get the solution.
Sure.
So you have to be working on a hopeless problem that has no solution before you can invent anything.
This sounds perfect for sustainability.
But don't back away from hopeless problems, okay? Get right up next to them and see how hopeless they are.
Right.
But then the trick you do from all that frustration, you have to release your mind to jump forward in time. It's actually a little bit of time travel. Let yourself jump forward in time mentally to where you've solved that problem. And you have to let yourself believe that you've solved it, turn around and look at how you did it.
I'm not sure I can pull this off. You have described it clearly, but I still...
That might be where there aren't that many inventors, because it's an interesting process, but it's quite euphoric when you actually do it. So I did this sitting here in this room, light bulb went on above my head, and I thought, holy smokes, I now see it. Here's the deal. You can't define sustainability because it's only definable in its failures.
Ah.
And there's other things that are like that, like safety. Mm-hmm. 100 years ago, engineers started working on safety in a big way, and they changed the world. If you don't believe me, do a little research on the history of safety.
I will have to do that, listeners. You as well. Get the Google going.
It's not that hard to find out. Just think about it. 100 years ago, would you have been wanting to work in a factory? If there'd have been a fire in a building, what would be your chances?
Poor.
Yeah, we have come so far.
Mm-hmm.
Just think, how would you define safety? Well, it's the same quandary. We don't ever work on safety. We work on eliminating hazards.
This is true.
Stopping what doesn't work.
Right.
Keeping track of near misses so we can figure out what we need to change. And then when we find something that works, like, okay, safety goggles, the glass that doesn't shatter, that was one of the first safety inventions because people were working on how do you stop things from flying into their eyes. So they were working on the problem, not some miracle thing that you don't know what it is. You work on the problem.
Sure.
And security is the same way. We don't work on security. We work on stopping things that are a threat to our security.
Stopping the breaches, yeah.
And sustainability is exactly the same way. You cannot work on sustainability. You can work on changing what's not sustainable.
Well, this is a major aha moment, I must say.
It is. And it's so little. Disappointment. But you have to appreciate how huge it is, because if you start working on what's not sustainable, suddenly you can work on anything. And you have your problem definition right there, and you can just get going on changing what needs changing. And that's the field of transition engineering. And so it was kind of born in that room when I was up against the wall of impossibility that, look, we've got the smartest people in the country in the room here, and they've come back to square one, and that's all the farther we're going to get.
So did you tell them in this meeting, or did you just kind of keep your mouth shut and feel it out later?
No, I didn't tell them.
Okay.
Well, it's one of those things that I thought, okay, I now see this. To me, that unlocked everything. But then it was actually, I got back to New Zealand and I was invited, a group of 18 people. We had a roundtable meeting again, and it was people from all these different walks of life. We had economists and social workers. And so your top 18 sustainability thinkers in New Zealand. And we were going to do this scenario of how New Zealand becomes sustainable. And again, same problem. We just were going absolutely nowhere. But now I'm in a room with people with diversely different ideas, and I hear them all like so not able to communicate with each other. And something popped into my head again, and it was the 7 blind men and the elephant. Mm-hmm. You ever seen that?
Yeah, I'm familiar.
This is a story of how people who really know what they're talking about, they have evidence, they know they're part of the thing, but they can't even communicate with people about the whole thing because they've only got their part of the thing. So I drew up a diagram that let me understand all the different aspects of sustainability, how you would change systems, and put that together. And I did actually present it to that group. They said, okay, we'll try it that way. And sure enough, we cranked it out after wasting a whole lot of time just sort of talking past each other. So that diagram has now become the transition engineering methodology. And that's what I teach. And that's where you can start working on what's called wicked problems, problems with no solution. How in the world would we ever do that? I don't know. I can't think about it.
Right. Well, congratulations. This sounds like a phenomenal success and just a complete change in almost your way of thinking about these types of problems.
That's what you need, isn't it? If your way of thinking is what's stopping you, then you got to change your way of thinking.
Then you got to think into the future. I'm going to have to try this.
Give it a go.
Susan, this has been phenomenal. Great to hear about your successes. And I know we've chatted a little bit about your life outside of science and engineering as well. And I'm curious to hear now, what is on your bookshelf, Susan? I love getting book recommendations from everyone that we have on our program. So do you have a recommendation for us today?
I actually do. Here's my favorite book. It's called A Midwife's Tale. I'm sure you can get it these days in Amazon. I don't know how, but A Midwife's Tale. It's written by a historian, and it's from a journal from the 1700s that was found in the attic of a New England house.
Interesting.
And so the historian goes through the journal and basically translates it for us because we don't know what she's talking about half the time, right?
The language is not the same, yeah.
Yeah, well, she's talking about things we don't know anything about. Mm-hmm. That context of the objects people were handling, the way that their society ran, there were just things that we don't know. And so it's a great historical just immersion in the real world of somebody. But that's not what's so exciting about it.
But wait, there's more.
Because I got to the end of it and I thought, oh, that was so much fun to actually learn what life was like then through the eyes of the person there. Thank you, historian, for explaining it to me. But the historian gets to the end and goes, I've explained all this to you, but I don't know why she wrote all this down, because it wasn't her thoughts and feelings. It was so-and-so turned up with a turkey. 3 a.m., so-and-so came. I had to walk through water. It was cold. I got to the birth. I attended the birth. And she takes an account of how long it took her to get there, how long it took to get back. And then that person that gave birth turns up 2 months later with a turkey. And she says, I don't know why she wrote all this stuff down. And I'm thinking, what, are you kidding me? This is her ledger. This is the other half of the economy that we don't even know existed. Because it was women. It was the female economy. It was the way they exchanged goods and services.
Sure.
And the person, like if she had to walk through snow, if it took a long time, if it was a difficult birth, then the person will turn up once with a turkey, twice with a turkey, 3 times with a turkey. She keeps track of it.
A turkey currency. I like it.
And then they know when they're even. Sometimes it's a turkey. Sometimes it's the person comes over and helps with the flax.
Wow.
There was a whole at least half of the economy that ran that way. And the historian didn't even see it. And I'm pretty sure I'm right that that's what that journal was her ledger. And you had to do that. They knew what the deal was, and there was no money exchange. She didn't get paid for any of this stuff she did with money. But she was also keeping track of her husband's affairs, which was all done in money.
This is fascinating.
That is interesting, especially when you think that now we've wiped out that half of the economy in our world.
Right.
It all is now transactional. Interesting.
I think it brings back that whole love of anthropology, the questions about how people in society work that you have. So fantastic recommendation there. And now we've chatted a little bit about some of the different places that you've been for science and engineering throughout your career. And I want to know now about your favorite place. So Susan, can you take us back in your memory to your favorite travel experience and tell us where you were and why it was so great?
All right. Well, I had a PhD student who was also very interested in traditional cultures, the anthropology, and energy connection. And we actually found a project by a little girl from an island called Rotuma in the Fiji group. It's possibly one of the remotest islands on the planet.
Very well. I hadn't heard of it, so it makes me feel better.
Rotuma. It's been inhabited for a couple thousand years. It's 500 kilometers from the nearest island, kind of by Tonga and Fiji. About 2,000 people live there. And this little girl emailed me and said, can you make coconuts into diesel? And so I wrote back and said, well, why would you want to do that? What do you need? And then her father, who was a doctor, wrote back to me and said, you're the first person she sent that email to who ever asked her, what does she need? Everybody else just launches into this explanation of biodiesel or whatever.
Sure. Complicated explanation.
And so we started this conversation, and it ended up that my PhD student then used Rotuma as his case study for the link between the costs and benefits to society of different levels of energy technology development. So we got permission to go to the island of Rotuma. It's not a tourist island. And just being there for that time and working with the local people and really understanding that our particular perspective of where we are and the way things work for us is such a tiny, limited slice in time and possibility that we need to open up our realm of possibility a bit wider.
So were you able to turn those coconuts into diesel for them?
Well, it turns out that was not what they needed.
Okay.
That the amount of work in the extreme heat of an equatorial island to extract the oily part of the coconut, to crush it, to heat it up enough to extract the oil, to then refine that oil using chemicals and catalysts and separate it and then do something with the part you have to separate, and then putting it into a diesel engine. What did you need that for?
It's more work than it's worth, it sounds like.
Yeah. So that's called energy return on energy invested. Probably my research group might be one of the leaders in that area because I understand energy return for energy invested. I have shredded coconuts in the heat.
Right.
And figured out how much oil there is in a coconut. There is enough oil to run a coconut lamp. There is enough oil to cook your daily taro. But to run a electric washing machine by turning it into diesel fuel and then running a generator, it doesn't work that way. It's just not worth it.
Gotcha.
So we came up with a methodology for strategic analysis of the whole realm of things that you could do with your energy inputs and what you get back from it, and how to actually find up the appropriate matches. And then this study of energy return on energy invested. So on this, like I said, this remote island with no stores, no hotels, we lived with people on the island. We participated in their way of life, which involved going out in the morning and getting fish and coming in and picking fruit. And just that really broadening of the understanding of what a good life is and how necessary all the gadgets and things and entertainments that we think are so necessary essentially probably not.
Right. The essentials are not so essential. Yeah.
Just playing volleyball with other people.
Sure.
A ball. That's essential.
Right.
I don't know what else is, but a ball is.
Well, Susan, this sounds like a wonderful experience to get out there and to really immerse yourself, like you said, in a different culture, in a world that's completely foreign to you with different problems and try and understand and help these people. So this sounds like a great experience. And I love how you emphasize the human component of this project, really getting in there and being able to work with the people. And I think as a scientist, as an engineer, you get to work with some phenomenal people. And I love talking to people about the funny memories that they have shared with people, the quirky traditions that have sprung up in different laboratories, because I think it's nice to show that human side of science, that lighter side of science. So do you have another memory that you could share with us today?
One of the absolute perks of being a professor is that you get to work with young people who are bright and interested at the peak of their game. And one of the huge perks of being an engineering professor is that you get to work with people from all over the world, because the people doing PhDs in any given university are very seldom monocultural.
Right.
I've had students from Brazil, Ghana, Maldives, Germany, France, England, United States, Iceland, And New Zealand, of course.
Sure.
So this really diverse group of people getting to know each other. Oh, Thailand goes on, I think. One of the ways that I work with our group is that we would take trips up into the mountains. And a lot of these people had never actually been out of a city. I had this one student from the Philippines who grew up in Manila and had never actually seen dirt, like soil.
Really?
Where the ground is.
Wow.
And when we took the girls from Bangkok up into the mountains the first time, and they'd never seen stars before.
That is some powerful stuff.
Yeah. So our memories as a group, going up into the mountains, hiking around, having these crazy discussions, playing cards, cooking meals together. I wouldn't trade that for anything. It's a great career.
Definitely. Well, I'm really glad you brought up some of these wonderful moments that you have shared with your lab group. And I think that is a big part of being a scientist, is being part of this community, whether it's your lab community, your scientific field, your institution. I think it is just a group endeavor. So wonderful stories that you shared with us today. And I know we've talked a little bit about the work that you've done, but I want to talk next about the work that you haven't yet been able to do. So Susan, let's pretend I'm going to give you everything for a moment. So things like funding, staff, technology, feasibility, not a problem. What is the one question that you would want to answer?
Wow. My imagination is snapping on that one.
I know. I was going to say you're a creative person. I'm excited to hear this.
All right. Well, I'm in Christchurch, New Zealand right now. And that's where I've lived for 15 years. And 4 years ago, we had a series of massive earthquakes. Our central city, our CBD, Central Business District, is gone.
Wow.
Nothing survived, really, which is kind of weird. And 15,000 houses were lost. And for a little town, well, we're 300,000 people, the size of the city, but we're kind of the last bus stop on the planet. We're down here on the South Island of New Zealand. We are the biggest city on the South Island, but at 300,000 people in an island 3 times the size of Taiwan, we're kind of by ourselves down here. So we've had this massive natural disaster, and it starts to get you thinking about the future. That if you had a blank slate within which to put in a new city, because you kind of got that opportunity now.
You have to, yes.
What would you do? And so it turns out that for years we had been working on ways to model what goes on in a city, and especially the energy consuming parts of what goes on in a city, which to a large degree is the transportation and the buildings, so that we could sort of model the metabolism of a city and understand if you changed different things, how that would affect the energy footprint. Because if you're going to look forward in time, that is the main adaptation that everything's going to have to make. That's the biggest change, is reducing the fossil fuel consumption massively. So we applied those tools to the city of Christchurch and looked forward in time 100 years to the post-fossil fuel world. Mm-hmm. And we essentially were able to see what the city could become, or what it will maybe, because what else are you going to do? It's not like you magically get more fossil fuels.
Right.
So what we could see was, well, if I was a developer, I know now where the market's going to go. I know what people are going to want because I can see what will work. And so we actually came up with a project we called From the Ground Up, just working from where the stable soils are, where you're above the high tide line for climate change induced sea level rise. We are on the ocean. We're a coastal town. Where you're out of floodplains, where you're connected to all the activities of the city. So we came up with a development plan. You work it down to, well, what's the first thing that you would build? And what it is repurposing, redeveloping an old suburb. So it was built in the 40s, 50s, 60s, before standards for insulation and that sort of thing.
All those code things, yeah.
Yes, all those code things. So they're not nice houses. They're kind of where the students are all piled in, camping out, and they're not healthy, but they're in exactly the right place. And this has got to be the same story for every city on the planet, right? That you have these kind of inner old suburbs, which now are in exactly the right place for the future of your city to move past its suburban sprawl era to its consolidated, low energy, walkable, diverse, urban future. So we did all the engineering and all the calculations and all the cost benefit analysis, construction, codes to build a redevelopment project of that area. Now is the part where nobody knows how to do it, which is there's an existing system of people in suburban houses that area's future is different from what it looks like now. So what is that project of how you work with those people to essentially realize, renew, become something different? Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a chance for democracy It's a chance for local control. It's a chance for determinism, for people to build things and to operate things in a way that they know is good for their future, as opposed to kind of this wild ride of crazy inflated house prices and debt. It's an opportunity to really understand a whole new way of developing our urban landscapes. And that action research, where we actually do that development, we learn how to do it by doing it. I need money to do the rest of this. For a whole first part where we now know what we would do, what would work, and we've worked with developers and investors, we know it would work. That's been done pro bono by volunteers and students and that. Mm-hmm. But now to actually do a development, we would need the money to figure out how to do it. I mean, with lawyers and with the council, it would actually take some funding. So if I had funding, I would set up a Future Cities Lab to work with the people who now own those properties to become owners, and the people around the properties and the people who would live in the new urban area, to just work through that process for the first time, figure out how to do it, know that we're not going to know how to do it. But that's why it's called action research, because you do the research and develop the new ideas and the new ways of doing things by doing them, because you don't know how to do them ahead of time.
Right.
So yeah, it would be an amazing opportunity. Turning loose the idea that I might actually get the funding to do it. That's what I would do.
Well, this is a phenomenal project. I think really important questions to start asking, not only for this specific city that needs to be rebuilt, but you're right, it has implications for the whole world, which is so cool. So, Susan, thank you so much for sharing this example. And I know we've chatted about a lot of different things today. In the process of our conversation, we've talked about some of the mentors, some of the people you've been able to work with. And I love getting advice from all the guests we have on our program. So I want to know today what you would consider is the best piece of advice that you've ever received from anyone.
The best advice ever has to be from your dad.
Of course.
Who said, do what you want to do.
I like it. And you took him up on this one, it seems.
Pretty simple advice.
Fantastic advice. Now, Susan, is there any other last piece of advice or any other last note of inspiration that you want to end our interview on today?
We have this tendency to want simple solutions to things. We want to know that if we just put solar panels on our roofs, everything will be okay. The climate change won't happen, that there will be some simple solution. And really, there aren't any simple solutions. There's just a lot of hard work to change the way we do things. So if you are a young person, if you're a student, stick with the math and science, get into engineering, and do what needs doing. And hopefully that's what you want to do, because that field will be opening up. I've worked hard to start this international global association of transition engineers, mostly just to show that little spark of look at the problem this way and aha, now you see what to do, don't you? Yes. To try and spread that spark to all engineers, just like safety did, actually. That's what I'm trying to do, is mimic the way that safety changed the world, being able to think about the future and work on the hard problems because that's what you decide to do. That little spark of an idea, trying to get that out there. So my advice is do what needs doing, please.
Absolutely. Well, Susan, I love this call to action that you have put out there for our listeners. Listeners, we need your help. If you are a young or aspiring scientist, or even if you are considering entering a field of science at any stage, and engineering as well, we need you to solve those big problems that are out there. So fantastic note to end on. Susan, can you tell our listeners how they can reach out if they want to know more about you and all your work?
Probably the simplest way is to Google transition engineering, because I think I'm about the only thing that pops up there. But my group's website is the AIMS Lab, Advanced Energy and Material Systems Lab. So AEMSLAB.org.NZ for New Zealand. And no chance of actually remembering how to spell my name, so don't Google that.
It is a challenge, listeners.
But if you Google my name, you won't get too many other things either. So if you can get the name in there, it's not hard to find me.
Perfect. Well, listeners, definitely get out there, check out those websites, see what else Susan is working on. And Susan, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing a piece of your story.
You're welcome.
Well, Susan, it was a pleasure to chat with you. And listeners, thank you so much for joining us today as well. We'll see you next time on another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.